Nobody has to abandon their principles here. Instead, what we ought to do is find where our principles overlap to find common ground. We all agree that Washington
Madam President, this afternoon, the 2013 Farm Bill Conference Committee will finally convene for the first time, bringing us one step closer to finishing the Farm Bill. I know that Madam President, being the senator from Wisconsin, understands how important this is to our country's future, and certainly the farmers and businesses and the families in Minnesota understand how important this bill is. We have waited a long time to go to this conference committee. The Senate, as you know, has passed 2 farm bills now that really continue the strong policies of the last farm bill, but in fact save $24 billion, reduce the debt by $24 billion over the farm bill that is currently in place. I'm part of the group that negotiated the details of the bill to help finish the process that started over 2 years ago. Before I go on about the details of this Senate bill, I would like to thank Chairman Stabenow for her incredible leadership and perseverance in getting us to this point that has been so long awaited. Under Chairman Stabenow's leadership, the Senate Agriculture Committee put together a farm bill that strengthens the safety net for our nation's farmers and ranchers, reforms and streamlines our agriculture and conservation and nutrition programs while still keeping them strong, and as I mentioned, reducing $24 billion from the nation's debt. Throughout the process, we faced unprecedented challenges and delay. We had the lack of a dance partner over in the House, but then, of course, we had the traditional issues, regional disputes about how certain crops and commodities should be handled, some few partisan issues here and there, but somehow we were able to come together to the point where the Senate bill was supported by 68 senators, Madam President, including 18 Republicans. I believe that this is a testament to the open process we had, the endless amendments that we voted on the floor, as well as the strong committee that was brought together to work on this bill. No matter where I go in my state, and I'm sure you've seen this in Wisconsin, I'm always reminded of the critical role that agriculture plays in our economy. Minnesota is #1 in turkey, something we think of a lot as we head into the Thanksgiving season. We are #1 in sweet corns, #1 in green peas and oats. We're #2 in hogs. I don't think people would think about that with our state, but we have surpassed some other states, and in fact are #2 in hogs and spring wheat, and we're #3 in soybeans and #4 in corn. But we don't just grow the crops and raise the livestock. We are also home to a number of major agricultural companies which have kept our economy strong and is one of the reasons that our unemployment rate is down to 5.1% in Minnesota. These companies include Hormel, Cargill, General Mills, co-ops like CHS, and Land O'Lakes. That's why one of the first things that I did when I came to the Senate was asked to be on the Agriculture Committee. I am honored to serve on this conference committee and to team up with my friend and House colleague, House member Colin Peterson, who will be leading the Democratic side in the House, as well as Congressman Tim Walz, who represents the southern part of our state. The expiration of the current Farm Bill on September 30th is hurting our agricultural economy and is creating a huge amount of uncertainty for our farmers and for our consumers. Last week, I visited with Minnesotans from across the state that want Congress to pass a farm bill. I was in Keister, Minnesota, where I got to ride in a combine and got to see the good work of our farmers as they harvested the corn. And I have to tell you, Madam President, that sitting in that combine after the 3 weeks of the shutdown was actually quite rewarding, as I saw firsthand you could actually get results very quickly in a combine, which I hope will happen in Congress as we move ahead. From farmers in Redwood County to the Red River Valley to volunteers at a food bank in Minneapolis, where we also had a joint event with hunger groups, conservation groups, including Pheasants Forever, which is based in Minnesota, and the Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union, we all came together to say we had to get this done. I journeyed up to the Moorhead area and joined Senator Hoeven in Fargo. We like to call it Moorhead-Fargo in Minnesota instead of Fargo-Moorhead, two towns that are joined, divided by a river, but joined by many common interests. And we met there with farmers about the importance of sugar beets, about the importance of a strong farm bill for that region of the country. I have to tell you, through my week, I quickly heard, which I'm sure you did in Wisconsin, that the people of this country are sick and tired of gridlock politics, are sick and tired of people standing in the opposite corners of the boxing ring and throwing punches. They are sick and tired of a red light, green light game that's been played with policy. It is time to come together and get this done. And I'm convinced if there is any silver lining or hope that came out of the chaos of last month, it was that the American people saw firsthand why we need change, why we need to work together, and that is why, in fact, Senator Hoeven and I came together across the river to make a very strong statement that we thought we had to get this bill done. As a member of the conference committee, I know that if we don't pass a new farm bill, farmers will not be able to sign up for crop insurance, something that is so central to this new bill and is a great part of the $24 billion in debt reduction. They won't be able to sign up for conservation program at a time when we need more conservation, when we see a decline in our pheasant population, where we're seeing the signs that we need to have strong conservation programs. We would also see a skyrocketing of dairy prices as we would be going back to the farm bill that was placed in 1949. As I like to say at home, we don't want to party like it's 1949, and we certainly don't want to farm like it's 1949. The failure to come together and to resolve the differences between the two bills now would likely result in either these 1949 prices or some kind of extension. And guess what? Ask the farmers and ranchers about that in South Dakota, which just saw a decimation to their cattle because of the sudden cold weather and blizzard that they experienced in South Dakota. This current bill that's in place does nothing to provide a safety net for them that used to be in place but isn't in place because of the fact that we haven't passed a permanent farm bill. It does nothing if we simply extended it about energy programs or about changes we need to see in the milk program or about reforms or the streamlining of our conservation programs. We simply can't afford to do that again. Finally, it does nothing to reduce the debt if we simply extend the current program. Farmers and ranchers don't want another extension like the one we saw last year that left out the programs that I just mentioned, the livestock disaster program, any significant deficit reduction. I believe the Senate bill that we're heading into this afternoon at the conference committee lays a strong foundation for a conference agreement that can be supported on a bipartisan basis and signed into law by the President. To put it more directly, over the weekend I got a call from Greg Schwartz, who works with the Minnesota corn growers. He was hard at work bringing in the harvest. He actually called me while driving his combine, and his words offer some perspective that were passed on to me on where we've been and where we need to go. He said, "We have been working on this farm bill for over 2 years now and just want to get it done. Farmers are working around the clock on this year's harvest, and if you don't hear from us, it's not because we don't care, it's because we have work to do." Greg is right, and members of the Farm Bill Conference Committee have our work to do as well. I believe that Washington should strive to be more like the farmers and ranchers that we represent who work until they get the job done. They can't just leave a bunch of corn or soybeans in the field just because they get sick of it or they don't like their neighbor. They have to finish the job. If it starts getting cold outside or if it's raining, they've got to bring that harvest in before there's a blizzard. That's what they do, and that's what we need to do, and we have a time deadline here, an important reason to get moving on this bill. I'd like to raise some of the areas of the Senate bill that I believe need to be preserved as part of the final agreement in near as possible to the way they are right now. I recognize there will be some compromise, but I think whatever compromise needs to work out should be closer to the bipartisan Senate bill that, as we know, had 14 Senate Republicans supporting the bill, including senators in my part of the country like Senator Grassley and Senator Hoeven. I know that important differences need to be worked out, especially in the areas of nutrition. I think we can do that, but again, I think given what we're seeing in terms of the cuts that we saw over in the House side, we have to get them much closer to where we are in the Senate bill, which is something that will keep a safety net, not just for our farmers, not just for our conservation and our pheasants and our wildlife, but also for the people of this country. Madam President, I believe the people who grow our food deserve to know that their livelihoods can't be swept away in the blink of an eye, either by market failures or by natural disasters. That's why in the Senate Farm Bill, the foundation of the safety net is a strengthened crop insurance program. We made the program work better for underserved commodities and specialty crops. In recognition of the importance of crop insurance, we extended conservation compliance rules to this program to ensure that all producers benefiting from this safety net play by the same set of rules and keep our water clean and soil productive for future generations. This agreement has the support of agriculture, environment, and wildlife leaders, including the National Farmers Union and the National Corn Growers, as well as the Environmental Defense Fund and Ducks Unlimited. That's quite a crew. In our charge to do more with fewer resources, the Senate bill pulls back on crop insurance subsidies for the wealthiest while ensuring that everyone can still participate in the program, keeping the risk pool strong. We also eliminated direct payments and further focused commodity title programs on our family farmers by strengthening payment limits and rules that ensure that farmers and not urban millionaires are eligible for farm payments. We continued the successful sugar program, funded the livestock disaster programs, which I mentioned earlier, and put in place a new safety net for dairy producers to address the wild volatility in that market. No one knows that better than the state of Wisconsin, the home of a lot of cheese, the home of a lot of cows, and the home of a lot of dairy. We streamlined conservation programs from 23 to 13. Specifically, I worked with Colin Peterson to ensure that local communities like those in the Red River Valley have the tools that they need to address conservation challenges like flooding. The bill funds energy title programs to expand homegrown renewable energy production. When you look at our reduction in dependence on foreign oil from 60 to 40% in just the last few years, yes, you look at the increased domestic drilling and natural gas. Yes, you look at the fact that we finally increased gas mileage standards that made a big difference in this country. But you also look at biofuels, which are now 10% of our nation's fuel supply. These bills ensure that we are working to support our farmers and workers in the Midwest and not the oil cartels in the Mideast. That's why I strongly support mandatory funding for the energy title to help provide incentives for homegrown energy production from the next generation of biofuels to blender pumps. This is a vital industry in states like mine, supporting thousands in jobs and millions of dollars in economic growth. I appreciate the support of my colleague, Senator Franken, for this important industry, as many of us that understand that you want an all-of-the-above energy approach. That includes oil, that includes natural gas, but also includes biofuels. The Senate bill ensures that our energy innovators have the certainty and stability they need to develop the next generation of American energy. The Senate bill also includes a number of initiatives for beginning farmers and ranchers, including two of my provisions. The first I introduced was Senator Baucus, which would reduce the crop insurance costs for beginning farmers by 10%. My second provision that I introduced with Senators Johans, Baucus, and Hoeven would allow beginning producers to use Conservation Reserve Program acres for grazing without a penalty. I believe that both of these provisions will go a long way in building the next generation of farmers who will grow our food supply. Both of these provisions should be included in the final bill. I believe that if we want to recruit a new generation of farmers and ranchers, we must take further action to improve the quality of life in our small towns and our rural areas. That's why I worked with Senators Hoeven and Heitkamp, and I led the amendment to provide additional resources for critical priorities in the Farm Bill, including research, something the Madam President knows something about from the University of Wisconsin, as well as rural development, conservation, and energy. Our provision funds the new nonprofit foundation, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, to leverage private funding with a federal match to support agricultural research. It provides additional funds to address the $3.2 billion backlog of water and wastewater projects in rural America. You literally can't go to a region of any state in rural America without hearing about this backlog of rural wastewater and water projects, and this amendment that we passed helps with that. It also increases funding for regional approach to conservation to address a variety of challenges, including the flooding that we saw in the Red River Valley. The provision also added an additional $100 million to the energy title to help farmers, ranchers, and rural businesses produce homegrown energy. I was pleased to get the strong support of our committee for that amendment, and I'm pleased that's included in the final Senate bill. In the Senate, we also preserved the essential nutrition programs that millions of families and children rely on every day. In recent years, programs like the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, have become especially important as hard-working families and seniors were suddenly cash-strapped, but still obviously in need of groceries. One of my predecessors, in fact, I have his desk, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, was an early champion of the food stamp program, now known as SNAP. As one of the founders, Humphrey was one of the founders of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota. He understood the importance of a stable government policy for both agriculture producers as well as families struggling to put food on the table. And that is why we've always seen this combination of these programs. It makes sense. Food comes from farms. Food is a safety net for the people of this country, just as the farm provisions, which are actually a minority of the provisions in this bill, that the farm provisions provide a safety net for those that provide food. And what we've done with this bill, of course, is reduce some costs and made it more efficient, but still kept a strong safety net. For more than 40 years, we've linked together food and farm policy in 5-year farm bills. Nearly 72% of SNAP participants are families with children, and more than 1/4 of participants are in households with seniors or people with disabilities. This is not the time to make the deep cuts as proposed in the House that provide to programs that provide important nutritional support for working families, low-income seniors, and people with disabilities with fixed income. Yet, what we've seen with those cuts that we will be discussing on the House side includes 170,000 veterans who would be cut off from food assistance if the House bill were to pass. Senate bill, on the other side, makes what I consider reforms that were necessary that brings the debt down by $4 billion. Reforms that were necessary, so it is not like there were no reforms to this program in the Senate bill. And as I noted, 68 senators voted for this bipartisan bill, including 14 Republicans. The cuts proposed by the House are in addition to the $11 billion cuts to the program that will go into place this Friday when the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act supplemental nutrition payments expire. This program is already moving in the right direction. As the economy has improved, nutrition assistance has been further focused on families in areas with the greatest need. In fact, the CBO projects projects that without any changes to the program, the number of people eligible for nutrition assistance and the cost of nutrition programs will continue to fall as the economy improves. In this way, nutrition programs operate a lot like the farm safety net for agriculture producers. Just as agriculture payments spiked during the 2012 drought, which was the worst since the 1950s, the need for nutrition assistance similarly increased when our economy was struck with the worst recession since the 1930s. When farmers are blessed with a strong harvest, or workers bring home a paycheck from a new job, we have designed agriculture and nutrition programs to adjust accordingly and be reduced. I believe that instead of trying to find ways to make people ineligible for nutrition assistance, we need to focus on real solutions that put people back to work. This farm bill is an opportunity to do that. As a number of the legislation efforts, My America Innovation Act, other things that we should be focused on, workforce training, bringing the tax reform in, bringing the corporate tax rate down and paid for. But if we continue to engage in the brinkmanship that we did in the last month, we are never going to get to that core issue, because I believe our country is on the cusp of economic expansion. I believe we have so many opportunities out there when you look how we're situated right now with manufacturing, with the increase in exports, and we need to do things like the immigration bill to actually help that economy move forward instead of do what we did last month. I think this Farm Bill is the first chance, the first opportunity to show that out of this chaos came something positive. It's a 5-year Farm Bill. It's worked in the past. It brings the debt down by $24 billion. It's a bipartisan bill. Let's show the people of America that we mean business about working across the aisle. Now, Madam President, I also would like to say, I see my colleague is here from Tennessee. I just have about 3 minutes more on a very different topic, and that is the nomination of Patty Millett to the D.C. Circuit Court. In the past few weeks, as I've mentioned, we have made some efforts to come together, end the shutdown, pay our bills. There are many of us that work together in relationships of trust, and I hope that continues with regard to nominations. Patty Millett would make an additional excellent addition to the court in the D.C. Circuit, and I urge my colleagues to vote for cloture and to confirm her without delay. Patty Millett has extensive federal appellate and Supreme Court experience. She previously served 15 years as an attorney in the appellate staff of the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Division, and then as an assistant to the Solicitor General. She has argued 32 cases in the Supreme Court, 32, in addition to dozens of cases in other appellate courts across the country. In addition to her work for the Justice Department and in private practice, she has also devoted substantial time to pro bono work. Ms. Millett clearly has an impressive professional background, but even outside the legal world, she volunteers as a literacy tutor and for the homeless in the D.C. area. She was given the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award for representing the interests of the United States before the Supreme Court, and the National Association of Attorneys General Award for assistance to the states in preparation for their appearances before the Supreme Court. Ms. Millett is the kind of woman that we should have on the bench. It should be no surprise that the Nonsen American Bar Association Committee that reviews every federal judicial nominee unanimously gave her its highest rating. And over 100 leading lawyers and law professors wrote a letter in support of her nomination. This letter included 7 former solicitors general who served under Democrat and Republican presidents alike. So clearly there can be no question she has the experience and ability to sit on the federal bench. She also has support of the Fraternal Order of Police, the Police Executive Research Forum, the National Women's Law Center, the Women's Bar Association, and the National Congress of American Indians. Ms. Millett is well qualified, and we should confirm her now. One justification, and there is only one that I have heard, and I don't think it is a good one, and I'm about to debunk it. But the only justification I have heard is not about her at all, Madam President. It's about that the D.C. Circuit, some of my colleagues think that they should remain with 3 openings on their bench. I don't think this argument squares with the facts. Currently, 3 of the 11 seats on the D.C. Circuit are empty, and according to the Administrative Office of the Courts, senior judges who are partially retired are now involved in over 40% of the cases that are decided on the merits. Before he was our Supreme Court Justice, John Roberts was confirmed to sit on the D.C. Circuit. 10 years ago, when Chief Justice Roberts was confirmed to sit on that circuit, the average judge on that court had only 125 pending cases. Today, with 3 vacancies on the court, that number is 185 cases. Those are the complex cases that are pending. Even if we fill all the empty slots, the judges on the D.C. Circuit will still have more pending cases on average than John Roberts did when we confirmed him to sit on the D.C. Circuit back in 2003. So there are no excuses here. We have a finally qualified nominee, 32 Supreme Court arguments, support of the nonpartisan group that looks at these nominees, someone whose spouse served in the military for 22 years, someone who raised her kids while he was over in Kuwait. And we are going to turn her down. Madam President, that makes no sense to me at all, and I really urge my colleagues to help Patty Millett to get into this job to do what she says is the highest honor you can have, and that is public service. She should be confirmed without delay. The Senate should confirm her this week. We heard that the American people, we all heard this when we were home, are sick and tired of this kind of delay and partisanship. She is a fine, highly qualified nominee. She should get an up or down vote. On that, Mr. President, I'm completed my remarks. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from South Dakota.
I rise to speak in support of Congressman Mel Watt to serve as Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. It has been over 5 years since the FHFA's inception, and it still has never had a confirmed director. First, Senate Republicans blocked President Obama's regional nominee for the post, Joe Smith, who was a technocrat. Today, they are trying to block Congressman Watt because they say he is a politician and not a technocrat. But they forget that Congressman Watt has over 40 years of experience in housing, real estate, and other financial services issues. Before coming to Congress, he practiced business and economic development law and personally walked hundreds of families through real estate closings. In Congress, he has served on the House Financial Services Committee for the past 21 years. In that capacity, was one of the first members to recognize the need for action on predatory lending. With great foresight, he introduced the Prohibit Predatory Lending Act in 2004 and introduced it every Congress until it became the foundation for the qualified mortgage provision of the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. If he had all listened to Congressman Watt before the housing crisis, then thousands of consumers might have avoided being scammed into unsafe mortgages that ultimately led to foreclosure. Congressman Watt has also shown a commitment to housing finance reform. In 2007, he partnered with Congressman Frank and introduced a bill to reform Freddie and Fannie. This bill eventually led to the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, which established the FHFA. Industry groups, consumer advocates, and fellow members of Congress have recognized Congressman Watt's impressive track record and support him for this position. One of his home state senators and the Republican senator who probably knows him best has supported his nomination from the beginning. Shortly after Congressman Watt's nomination was announced, Senator Burr stated, quote, "Having served with Mel, I know of his commitment to sustainable federal housing programs and am confident he will work hard to protect taxpayers from future exposure to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I look forward to working with Representative Watt in his new role to find new ways to facilitate more private sector involvement in the housing and mortgage markets," unquote. Recently, the National Association of Home Builders sent a letter in support of Congressman Watt's nomination, stating, during Representative Watt's tenure on the House Financial Services Committee, he has proven to be a thoughtful leader on housing policy, the FHFA needs a permanent director with his leadership capabilities. The National Association of Realtors has also sent a letter of support praising Congressman Watt by stating the director of the FHFA must weigh the cost of action and inaction with the benefits of protecting the taxpayer and ensuring that the housing sector can stabilize and grow. Mr. Watt has the experience and skill necessary to ensure that both are handled in a manner that will benefit our nation. It is time that we finally confirm a director for the FHFA to ensure stability and confidence on the housing market. Congressman Watt has experience, intellect, and temperament to succeed as a director, and there is no legitimate reason why Congressman Watt should not be confirmed. At a minimum, as a sitting member of Congress, he deserves the courtesy of an up or down vote. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the motion to invoke cloture so that we can proceed to an up or down vote on Congressman Watt's nomination. He yields the floor.
The senator from Tennessee.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Majority Leader says that it's time to cut off debate and vote on the President's nominees to fill 3 vacancies on the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. I will not vote to end debate now because I think such a vote would be premature. Before the Senate has an up and down vote on the 3 judges, there's something else we ought to do first. We should first consider the bipartisan proposal that was made 10 years ago to have the right number of judges on this federal appellate court. For more than a decade, senators of both parties have argued that this court has more judges than it needs and that other federal appellate courts have too few. In 2003, 2005, 2007, with a Republican president in the White House, Republican Senators Sessions and Grassley introduced legislation to reduce the number of seats on the D.C. Circuit. In 2006, they were joined by a distinguished group of 8 Judiciary Committee Democrats who made the same argument. These included the chairman, Senator Leahy, Senator Schumer, Senator Feingold, Senator Kennedy, Senator Feinstein, Senator Durbin, Senator Cole, Senator Biden. So when President Bush nominated Peter Keisler to the D.C. Circuit, the Democrats wrote Senator Specter, the committee chairman, a strong letter. Let me read from the letter. We believe that Mr. Keisler should under no circumstances be considered, the Democratic senators said, much less confirmed by this committee before we first address the very need for that judgeship and deal with genuine judicial emergencies by the Judicial Conference. The Democratic senators argued, first, the committee should, before turning to the nomination itself, hold a hearing on the necessity of filling the 11th seat on the D.C. Circuit to which Mr. Keisler has been nominated. They cited a number of objections by senators to the need for more judges on that circuit. Then they argued, this was 6 years ago, that since these emphatic objections were raised in 1997, by every relevant benchmark, the caseload for that circuit has dropped further. Only after we reassess the need to fill this seat and tend to judicial emergencies should we hold a hearing on Mr. Keisler's nomination, unquote. That was the Democratic senator's position in 2007. Now, these distinguished Democratic senators were not only forceful in 2006 and 2007, they were persuasive. They worked with President Bush and Congress, agreed to reduce the D.C. Circuit by 1 seat and add it to the 9th Circuit, where the caseload was 526 filings per judge, well above the caseload average for all the judicial circuits. Senators Feinstein, Democrat, Senator Kyle, a Republican, wrote, quote, it makes sense to take a judgeship from where it is needed the least and transfer it to where it is needed the most. Senator Feinstein, Senator Kyle, writing in 2007. Mr. Keisler, by the way, was never confirmed. For 2.5 years, his nomination was held in the Judiciary Committee. from June 2006 until January 2009. Now, Mr. President, the same arguments made in 2006 and 2007 should be persuasive today. Today, the average caseload for the circuit, the D.C. Circuit, even if it were reduced by 3 judgeships to the 8 seats currently occupied, would be less than one-half the national average for circuit courts. The national average is 344 cases filed per judge this year in federal appellate courts. The D.C. Circuit average, if it were reduced to the 8 current judges, would be 149 per year. National average, 344 cases per year. D.C. Circuit average, even if it's reduced to 8, would be 149 per year, less than half. Since 2005, there's been a decrease of 27% in the number of written decisions by an active judge on the D.C. Circuit. Since 2005, the number of appeals filed in the D.C. Circuit has fallen by 17.5%. So before it considers any of the President's nominees for the D.C. Circuit, the Senate should do in 2013, today, what Republican President Bush and the Democratic Senate did in 2007. First, consider the appropriate number of judges for the D.C. Circuit, and then, as Senator Kyl and Senator Feinstein wrote, take a judgeship from where it is needed least and transfer it to where it is needed most. I've heard the argument that the cases in the D.C. Circuit are more complex than in another circuit, and therefore the caseload ought to be lighter. Well, with 8 judges, it'll be a lot lighter, half the national average for circuit courts. That ought to allow plenty of time to write decisions in complex cases. And other circuits have complex cases as well. For example, the Second Circuit, including New York, regularly handles many of the most complex cases that come to the federal courts. And finally, there are a number of senior judges who are active in the D.C. Circuit. That's true in almost all the circuits. That's part of the way our system works today. They can carry some of the workload when that becomes necessary. But I think it is striking that even if this court only has 8 seats, that the average caseload is less than half of the national average. So why does it need 3 additional judges? That's the question that Democratic senators asked in 2007 and that the Senate addressed and that President Bush addressed. And that's the question we should be asking today before we fill any more seats for an underworked circuit court. So I'll not vote to end the debate on the President's nominees until the Senate does in 2013 what Democratic senators suggested and the Senate did in 2007. Assess the need for judges on the D.C. Circuit and transfer judges from where they're needed least to where they're needed most. That means before we act on the President's 3 nominees, the Judiciary Committee and the full Senate should consider Senator Grassley's legislation that would transfer 1 judge to the overworked 2nd and 11th circuits and eliminate 1 judge, leaving the D.C. Circuit with a caseload still that is less than half the national average for the 8 remaining judgeships. Then, if there still are vacancies to be filled in the D.C. Circuit, the Senate can consider them one by one. Now, Mr. President, the Senate has treated President Obama very well in considering his nominations. According to the Congressional Research Service, as of August of this year, President Obama's cabinet members were, on average, 54 days, moving from announcement to confirmation at about the same pace as those of President Bush and President Clinton. As far as President Obama's judicial nominees, President Obama has had 38 Article III judges confirmed at this point in his 2nd term, 9 circuit judges, 25 district judges, 4 judges to other Article III courts. By comparison to those 38, President George Bush had 16 Article III judges confirmed, 7 circuit judges, 7 district judges, 2 judges to other Article II courts. What about a waiting list of judges who are waiting to be confirmed by the Senate? Is there a big backlog? The answer is no, Mr. President. As of today, only 2 circuit judges have been reported by the committee and await floor action. Remember, the committee is controlled by Democrats. They can report whomever they want. Both of these are for the D.C. Circuit and are not judicial emergencies. And only 7 district court nominations await floor action. None have been waiting long. 3 were reported in August. 4 were reported in September. So while there are always a few nominations that provoke controversy and take a while to consider, one of the Senate's most important and best-known powers is the constitutional authority to advise and consent on presidential nominations. That's a part of the checks and balances that our founders set up so that we didn't have a king. We didn't have a tyranny. We made it slower. We gave the president the right to nominate, but the Senate has the right to advise and consent. Sometimes that takes a while. Sometimes those nominees are rejected. I believe and have argued consistently that with rare exceptions, presidential nominations deserve an up-and-down vote after an appropriate time for consideration. President Obama's nominations have been receiving timely up-and-down votes. But first, as senators of both political parties have argued for 10 years, we should make certain that we have the right number of judges on the court. We don't have money to waste in this country with the debt that we've got today. We should transfer judges from where they're not needed least, from where they're needed least, to where they're needed the most. That's the sensible thing to do. And the President's nominees for the D.C. Circuit will receive up or down votes insofar as I'm concerned, unless there are exceptional circumstances. Now, Mr. President, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to include in the record the letter of July 27, 2006 from 8 Democratic senators to Chairman Arlen Specter suggesting that the hearing on Mr. Keisler be postponed until the Senate had considered the number of judges on the D.C. Circuit. And I would like, in addition, to include additional views of Senator Feinstein and Kyle that were written at that time.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I have one other statement I would like to make. I see Senator from Missouri waiting, and I will include most of this in the record, but I would like to begin it because it is an important day and an important statement, because it is a remembrance of nuclear weapons workers, particularly in Tennessee and the Oak Ridge area. I come to the floor today to give thanks and show respect to the World War II and Cold War heroes who served in our nation's nuclear weapons program on this 5th National Day of Remembrance. They weren't serving in the heat of battle, but in the laboratory, handling materials on a daily basis that ranged from benign to toxic and highly radioactive. These materials posed risks that many scientists did not understand at the time. Today in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the American Museum of Science and Energy and Cold War patriots are gathering to celebrate former workers and view a quilt that honors nuclear workers for their contributions to America's safety. This one-of-a-kind remembrance quilt has 1,250 commemorative handwritten quilt squares that form an American flag that measures 17 feet by 11 feet. I want specifically to remember Bill Wilcox for his service to our country and passion for preserving Oak Ridge history. Bill passed away this summer. He was a former manager of the K-25 operations, a Manhattan Project veteran, and the official historian for the city of Oak Ridge. In 1943, Bill was hired by Tennessee Eastman on a secret project in an unknown location. When he started at Eastman, he was told as chemist, "You'll have to know that you'll be working on this project with a substance called uranium. That's the last time you'll hear that word, or that you will speak it until after the war. And if you're ever heard speaking the word, you'll be subject to discharge from our employment immediately and very likely prosecuted by the United States government and may end up in jail. Is that clear?" In Oak Ridge, the ground broke for the Y-12 plant in February of 1943. By the end of the summer, they started installing the collutron machines, complex physics machines. About 1,000 collutrons were installed at Y-12. How were they operated? Tennessee Eastman said the collutrons couldn't be run as an experiment, but should be run like an industrial plant Rather than manuals, there should be a simple red line on meter E, meter A. The operator would turn knob A until the needle is on red line on meter A. Mr. President, I would like to include in the record the remainder of my statement on this day of remembrance for nuclear weapons workers. I ask consent to do that, and I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into a colloquy with my colleagues from Delaware and Ohio for up to 30 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I just say that we're going to be talking about something here. It's one of those rare, all too rare occasions anymore where we all agree, and it's about making things. We want to talk for the next few minutes about what happens in our country, what needs to happen so that we can not just make things again, because we still make lots of things and we make them very well, but what do we need to do to be able to make more things? What do we able to do to be able to be sure that we're at the competitive front of the line as we work to make things? All of us are working on things together. Senator Brown and I have been working on advanced manufacturing. I know it's something he has talked about. We have talked about together. He has been a leader on for a long time, and all of our states benefit. Missouri and Ohio have certainly been among the significant manufacturing states. In Missouri, we have more than $32 billion a year in manufacturing. For about the last 4 years, that's been the top manufacturing employee has been in the agricultural industry and in food processing, but transportation equipment, fabricated metals, machinery of all kinds, automobiles have been in the top of our manufacturing sectors. But I think we're really at a point where so many things could easily come together, and the federal government and the Congress can help to make those things together by taking down barriers, by creating easier ways to work together. And in the case of advanced manufacturing, this is something, the centers of excellence that we've talked about, we've worked on, we've both seen some of these work, and I'd just like to ask Senator Brown some of the things he's seen and the things that we think we could better do by the legislation that we've been talking about.
Sure. Thank you. And I appreciate the Senator Blunt's yielding, and as I do the colloquy with Senator Coons, both of whom have been leaders in manufacturing in Missouri and in Delaware. It's pretty clear what these public-private hubs can do in terms of a multiplier effect. If you look at manufacturing history in this country, and of course I would use an illustration of my state and understand my state better than I do any other. But when, Akron was a tire manufacturer, was the center for tire manufacturing along the Ohio Turnpike in northeast Ohio from Toledo, where glass manufacturing was some of the leading, was prominent and prevalent for decades, to autos in Cleveland, to steel, and then to rubber in Akron. You can see that once you have a sort of an innovative focus, then other kinds of manufacturing comes out of that. Akron now went from, as the tire industry declined over the decades, now is one of the leaders in polymer. Toledo, which was a leader in glass manufacturing, plate glass for cars, bottles, a lot of other kinds of glassware. Toledo has become a solar center. And so what the legislation Senator Blunt and I have come up with will, I think, help American workers and American business have the drive and the creative thinking and the determination to out-innovate the rest of the world. Before turning it to Senator Coons, I'd like to just tell a real quick story that tells me why it's so important that manufacturing take place here. We out-innovate the rest of the world. We're the most creative. We're the best innovators. We lead in foundational research and other kinds of research. The problem is, as we invent things in this country, if we then outsource the manufacturing, so much of the creativity and innovation, both in process and in product, take place in that other country because it takes place in the shop floor. And I'll give you a real quick example. The largest yogurt manufacturer in North America is in a town in western Ohio near where Neil Armstrong grew up, near Wapakoneta. And that yogurt manufacturer I was there one day, and they used to bring in the suppliers would bring in would send the plastic cups to the shop floor, to the manufacturer, and they'd fill with these big silver vats. They'd fill these plastic cups with fermented milk, with yogurt, package it, and send it. And a young industrial engineer and a couple of people who worked on the line for years said, we can do this a lot less expensively and save money for the company and be more productive and efficient. And they developed, the three of them, something pretty simple to an engineer, not so simple perhaps to me, but simply they fed a roll of plastic in, a sheet of plastic, and it was slowly heated. It was then extruded, then cooled, then filled with yogurt. The line was about 75 feet, and it made for a much more efficient operation. That innovation took place on the shop floor of an American manufacturing plant, making the productivity of that plant much greater. And that's really how we need to look at this, in my view. If we're going to do this partnership with government and local manufacturers and local labor unions and local businesses and suppliers, we can do the kinds of work that Senator Blunt mentioned with these manufacturing hub, this network of manufacturing innovation initiative that we've had. We introduced the bill this summer. We're working to build support. We welcome our colleagues in support of it. And if either of you want to tell us, Senator Coons and Senator Blunt's already mentioned what it can mean in Missouri, what it would mean in Delaware, what it would mean to this country, and just writ large what better manufacturing, more innovation means to our country. So I thank my two colleagues. I have a conference committee with agriculture I need to join, but I appreciate very much your opening this up.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Brown, and thank you for your tireless and engaged leadership on manufacturing, on fighting for access to foreign markets, on fair terms, for fighting for skills and increasing the skills of our manufacturing workforce, and in this instance, in this strong bipartisan bill, in working with our colleague from Missouri on a national network of manufacturing innovation centers. My own work, 8 years in a manufacturing company in Delaware, in a materials-based science company that makes things, helped make it clear to me how important research and development, continuous innovation is for manufacturers at all levels. And I've seen this across the state of Delaware, and our presiding officer, a long owner and a leader in a manufacturing business in his home state of Indiana, knows this better than any of us, that if you don't innovate, if you don't invest in research and development, in improving the skills of the workforce and improving the productivity and the operating efficiency of any manufacturing company, you can't survive in the tough headwinds of the global marketplace today. One of the programs that I champion here in the Senate and that has bipartisan support is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. It's a long-established program that takes the latest cutting-edge research and development work at universities and moves it to the shop floor. I have visited companies up and down Delaware, from FMC in Newark and Speakman in Newcastle to Miller Metals in Bridgeville and Baltimore Air Coil in Milford, where they have taken those innovations from the university to the shop floor. One of the things I'm grateful to Senator Blunt for is his leadership in taking that insight, that in order to have the most productive manufacturing workforce in the world, in order to continue to compete globally, we have to find ways to continue to invest in demonstrating the power of innovation, and we have to find ways to do that in a bipartisan way. So, Senator Blunt, I just wanted to thank you for being willing to work with Senator Brown and with others here. This is exactly the sort of stuff that I hear from Delawareans they want us to be doing. There's lots that divides us. This is something that unites us, working together to strengthen our manufacturing sector, to make it more competitive, to bring jobs back to the United States, and to grow this sector. We've grown 500,000 jobs in the last 3 years in the manufacturing sector. These are good jobs at high wages, high benefits, high skills, but we can and should do more pulling together to sort of lift further this ongoing manufacturing revival. Senator Blunt, if you'd share some more with us about this specific bill and about your experience in what else we can and should be doing together to strengthen manufacturing in Missouri, I'd be grateful.
Well, Senator Coons, I'd like to say that your point is well made, that these jobs, manufacturing jobs, are good jobs. You know, the American workforce is competitive. As Senator Brown said, we've always been on the cutting edge, the outside of competition, making things in a better way than we did last year. You know, everybody that's competing today is trying to figure out how they can do whatever they did last year better. And we see that, and what we can add to that, how you can make that process work better. In our state, the average manufacturing job pays 21.5% more than the average wage. So 21.5%, that $52,000 or so that's the average manufacturing job in Missouri is a significant improvement in where you might otherwise be. We have 6,500 manufacturing firms. Almost 250,000 people work in manufacturing, and we used to have more than that. We used to have more than that, and I think we'll have more than that again. The country used to do more in terms of manufacturing than it does now, but we're going to see that happen. You just wrote an article in Congressional Quarterly that talked about the things that need to be done, the great opportunities we have in energy. We take advantage of those great energy opportunities. Suddenly the utility bill is more predictable. The delivery system is more guaranteed. I was talking to a manufacturer today in my office, and this topic came up at some point now, as you get more and more further and further into innovation, people not only have to be better trained, you talked about that too, the importance of the skilled workforce, but the workforce, how the workforce competes with maybe a lower paid workforce in some other country, maybe not nearly as important as how the utility bill competes. If you can run that facility, and I just gave him an example of another manufacturing facility in my hometown in Springfield, Missouri. It was making a significant expansion, I think about $150 million expansion, but they didn't expect to hire any more people, but they expect to use that current workforce in a much more competitive way. Nobody was losing a job because of advanced competition. They're just expanding that workforce in a way that ensures that they'll keep their job, be more competitive. Of course, somebody, by the way, is building that expansion. There are jobs there as well, and those all matter. We have all kinds of examples. Perryville, Missouri is a town of less than 10,000 people who live there. And in that town, it's become a hub. It's about 80 miles south of St. Louis, a hub of 21st century manufacturing. So a Japanese company is there, Toyota Gozai, that it makes plastic components for automobiles. Saberliner makes aviation parts and is in the airplane industry. Gilster Mary Lee, a much more traditional employer. But here's a town that has a significant number of manufacturing jobs. A town of Cassville near Springfield for a number of years had more manufacturing jobs than they had population. Now, of course, that meant in the part of the country where I live, lots of people may have been driving a significant number of miles to get to those jobs, but there aren't very many cities. This is a smaller community. It's the county seat of Berry County. But more manufacturing jobs than people that lived in the community itself meant that that's a competitive community. That's a community that knows how to build jobs. Perryville is a community that's really launched itself well into the 21st century. And the skills you were talking about, the skilled workforce, the energy needs, the research component. You know, one of the components of these hubs of excellence that we've been looking at and talking about, Senator Brown and I have been working on, is to create ways to encourage higher education to be part of that, to encourage higher education to be part of that research component. And I think Americans are eager to make things again. I bet you and I both hear the same thing over and over again. How can we have a strong economy if we don't make things? Well, you can have a strong economy, parts of the economy that don't make things, but I think not only do you need to make things, but there's something that really defines who we are in a positive way when people see Americans making things that not only are heavily competitive here, but are competitive all over the world. And I think that's the kind of thing, Senator Coons, you and I are talking about, the kind of bipartisan effort we need to make. I don't run into any Republicans or any Democrats anywhere or any independents who said, oh, we don't need to worry about making things. We don't need to worry about a competitive economy. Actually, private sector jobs should be the #1 domestic goal of the federal government today, and the jobs we're talking about are a significant component of that because they lead to lots of other jobs. All of the ripple effect of manufacturing jobs is great, the other businesses that spring up, the suppliers that come, and, of course, you know, your state, your family, I know your father, you and I have talked about that, was a significant part of launching new things into the marketplace. And so I think that's the kind of thing that you and I want to see this Congress encourage, as we can encourage things without law and look for legislative ways to facilitate a growth back toward manufacturing.
Well, thank you, Senator Blunt, for your work on this bill with Senator Brown. There are other bills that I hope this body will take up and discuss and debate, and where I hope we can find ideas that are out there, progress that's being made, policy innovation that's being made, and that we can take them up, debate them, and find bipartisan sponsors who will carry them forward. I absolutely agree with your point that we're seeing a manufacturing revival in this country for a variety of reasons. One of them is less expensive energy. The shale gas revolution is reducing the feedstock costs for chemical manufacturing and reducing the energy costs broadly for manufacturing of all kinds. We're also seeing that lots of American companies fear the loss of their inventions, their innovations, if they move offshore, and so some of the attractiveness of operating in other countries has dimmed a bit as they've recognized that the United States is one that has a rule of law that protects their inventions and innovations. There's also less of a wage gap, frankly, as wages have come up in the developing world. In China, the wage gap is less. So that combination gives us a window, gives us a moment of opportunity. We lost millions of manufacturing jobs in the first years of this century, but in the last 3, we've been growing them and growing them steadily. If we can work in partnership across the aisle on manufacturing skills, on access to credit, on innovation, on a coordinated strategy, I can't imagine a community in this country that wouldn't rather have high-quality manufacturing jobs. Senator Blunt, as you were mentioning, for every manufacturing job that's created, there's 1.6 new support jobs created. For every dollar spent in manufacturing, there's $1.34 spent in the local economy that moves around. It is the sector that has the most positive secondary impact in our communities at home. I do think that there's broadly in our country a sense that we've sort of lost our leading edge in manufacturing because of the large-scale layoffs and the large plants closing. But in my state, and I presume in yours and in Indiana and in others, there are dozens and dozens of small and medium manufacturers who have seized this moment, who are growing, and who simply want us to help facilitate their access to the market, their access to innovation and new research, their access to a skilled workforce. If we can pull together around this, I think we can do great things for the United States going forward. I did also, before we close, Senator Blunt, want to thank you for being a co-sponsor with me of the Startup Innovation Tax Credit, something Senator Enzi and I and many others, Senator Rubio and Senator Schumer, Senator Stabenow, as well as Senator Moran, have co-sponsored and introduced and discussed over time. It would help with access to capital for early-stage startup manufacturers. There's lots of good ideas that we can and should discuss on the floor, in hearings, and going forward. But for today, I am grateful, Senator Blunt, for your leadership with Senator Brown on this bill that would help strengthen the national network of manufacturing innovation centers. You are a strong leader for manufacturing in your home state of Missouri, and I am grateful for a chance to spend some time with you on the floor here today discussing that good bill and your good ideas.
Let me talk just a little bit about the Startup Act that you and I have worked on, Senator Coons, and you mentioned, I think, all the co-sponsors of that, Senator Rubio, Senator Stabenow, Senator Moran, Senator Kaine, Senator Schumer.